bond beyond battle, the story of Jack and Rex. The sound of a lone bark echoed through the abandoned parking lot, the harsh wind biting at the edges of the small desert town. Jack Reynolds staggered to his knees, his heart pounding in his chest. He had been searching for months, and now he was here. But when the door creaked open and their eyes met, the bond that had once been unbreakable, that had saved their lives in war, was gone. Rex, the dog who had once fought beside him through fire and fury, looked at him like a stranger. Jack's breath caught. "What happened to you, boy?" Welcome to the HeartForce channel, where you and I find more meaning in life through dog stories. Before we continue, please comment below and let us know where you are listening to this video. And if you have any stories about your loyal friends, please share them with us. Jack Reynolds had never thought he'd be back here, standing outside the gates of a small shelter in the middle of Arizona, with nothing but the hot desert sun beating down on his shoulders. His uniform, once polished and proud, now felt like a heavy weight on his chest. He had been back from Afghanistan for over 2 years now, but the scars, both physical and emotional, remained. His life felt like it was on pause, a cruel reminder of the bond he had lost. But today, something changed. Today, he was here, looking for Rex. The German Shepherd had been Jack's partner through it all. They had faced ambushes, explosions, and the darkest corners of war together. Rex had saved his life countless times, never hesitating to put himself in danger to keep Jack safe. They were more than just a handler and a dog. They were brothers in arms. But that bond had been ripped away, and now Jack was standing in front of a cage, staring at a dog who no longer recognized him. Jack's heart tightened as he peered through the wire fence. Rex was sitting in the far corner of the cage, staring blankly at the wall. The same eyes that had once been full of loyalty and trust were now cold, distant. Rex's ears flicked at the sound of Jack's footsteps, but he didn't move. He didn't react. Jack swallowed the lump in his throat and stepped closer. "Rex!" Jack's voice cracked, but he forced the words out. "Rex, it's me. It's Jack." For a moment, Jack thought he saw a flicker of recognition in the dog's eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Rex turned his head, his gaze drifting away. Jack's hand clenched into a fist, his knuckles white. He wanted to reach out, to call to Rex, to bring back the connection that had once been so strong. But the dog simply turned his back, retreating into the corner of the cage. "Jack!" A voice pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to see Emily, his sister, standing at the entrance. She had been the one to track Rex down, the one who had spent months searching for the dog who had been his lifeline. She had been there when Jack's world started to crumble, when a separation from Rex had thrown him into the depths of PTSD. Emily had always been there, trying to pick up the pieces of her broken brother. Jack wiped his face with his sleeve, trying to hide the tears that had started to well up in his eyes. He didn't want to break down in front of her. Not again. Not in front of anyone. "I don't think he remembers me," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily walked over to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "He's been through a lot, Jack. You both have. But he'll remember. It's just going to take time." Jack shook his head, unable to stop the flood of emotions that hit him. "I should have never let them take him. I should have fought harder to keep him with me." Emily's eyes softened, but there was a resolve in her voice. "You couldn't have known. They took him from both of you, and you've both been through hell because of it. But this isn't the end, Jack. We're going to get him back. We're going to fix this." Jack stood there, staring at Rex, who was still curled up in the corner of the cage. The dog had become a shell of the soldier he once was. But Jack wasn't giving up. He couldn't. Rex had been his partner, his protector. And no matter what it took, Jack was going to bring his dog back, no matter how long it took, no matter how much it hurt. Jack had spent the next few days coming to terms with the reality of Rex's condition. The dog he had fought beside, the one who had saved his life countless times, was a shadow of his former self. Jack would sit by the cage every day, talking to him, try to reach through the walls that had grown around Rex's heart. But the dog remained distant, locked away in a place Jack could not touch. Emily had been supportive, always there with a calm word, but Jack knew the truth. They were both hurting in different ways. Emily had seen the toll the separation had taken on Jack. She had witnessed the sleepless nights, the anxiety, and the frustration. It was a familiar pattern. She had also seen Rex's decline. Both of them were broken, and it seemed that the world had conspired to keep them that way. Jack stood outside the shelter one evening, the sun dipping below the horizon. He watched as the staff worked to prepare the dog for the evening. His heart ached when he saw Rex, still staring blankly into space, moving in slow, mechanical movements. Jack had seen Rex go through so much, and now, here he was, a dog lost in his own mind. As the days passed, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something deeper than just the emotional strain of the separation. Rex had been through the brutalities of war, but he had also carried a burden, one that was beyond Jack's understanding. The trauma of war was a burden Rex had carried just as heavily as Jack, and now that they were apart, neither of them knew how to heal. One night, after another unsuccessful attempt to connect with Rex, Jack stood at the shelter's gate, staring out into the desert. The loneliness was overwhelming. He missed the days when he and Rex would patrol together, when the dog would guide him through the narrow streets of a war-torn village, their silent language keeping them both alive. Jack could almost feel the dog's presence beside him, the bond that had once been unshakable. "Jack!" Emily's voice broke through the silence. She had followed him outside, her steps quiet but deliberate. "You can't give up on him." Jack didn't turn around, his gaze fixed on the empty horizon. "I don't know if I can fix this, Em. Every time I try, it feels like I'm just making it worse." She stepped closer, standing beside him. "You're not making it worse. You're trying to heal. You both are." Jack's hands tightened on the gate. "What if this is it? What if this is the new Rex? What if the dog I knew is gone forever?" Emily's voice softened, but her words carried a quiet strength. "The Rex you knew isn't gone, Jack. He's just lost, and so are you. But together, you'll find your way back." The words felt like a lifeline. Jack glanced over at her, her eyes filled with a deep understanding, one that only a sister could have. She knew what he was going through. She had seen it all, the pain, the loss, the darkness. But she also knew that Rex was more than just a dog. He was a partner, a hero, in Jack's family. And no matter how broken they both were, they still had a chance. The next morning, Jack made a decision. He wasn't going to wait for Rex to come to him. He was going to rebuild their bond, one step at a time, starting with something simple. He had brought his old tactical vest to the shelter, the one Rex had worn on their missions together. The familiar scent of sand and gunfire clung to the fabric, a reminder of everything they had shared. Jack stood in the shelter, looking at Rex as he stood in his cage, his posture defensive, his eyes distant. "Come on, boy," Jack whispered, slipping the vest over his shoulders. "Let's start with this." He held his breath as Rex's ears perked up. The dog didn't move at first, but his eyes lingered on Jack. Then, slowly, Rex shifted. His eyes narrowed, focusing on the vest, and for the first time in days, there was a flicker of recognition. Jack moved cautiously, not wanting to scare him. "Come here, Rex. It's me. I need you." The German shepherd took a few hesitant steps forward, his body stiff with uncertainty. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes scanning Jack, trying to make sense of the situation. But Jack was patient. He didn't rush, didn't force anything. He simply stood there, allowing the dog to come to him at his own pace. Then it happened. Rex took one more step and nuzzled his head against Jack's leg, a gentle nudge that was unmistakable. It was the same gesture Jack had felt so many times in the past, a signal of trust, of companionship, of love. Jack's heart surged. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was a sign that the connection was still there. They weren't lost yet. "I'm here, buddy," Jack whispered, kneeling down and scratching Rex behind the ears. "We're going to fix this together." The next few weeks felt like a slow, delicate dance. Every day, Jack showed up at the shelter with a sense of purpose, carrying the weight of his responsibility to Rex and to their shared past. It wasn't just about rescuing the dog. It was about rescuing himself as well. The bond they had built in the fires of war had been torn apart, but Jack was determined to rebuild it, brick by brick. He kept the tactical vest with him, wearing it during their visits, letting Rex become familiar with its presence again. It was a symbol of their shared history, their shared struggles. But it was also something more, a bridge between who they were and who they needed to become again. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Jack walked into the shelter with the vest slung over his shoulder. The air was thick with the familiar scent of wet fur and disinfectant. But today, it didn't seem to matter as much. Today felt different. Rex was lying in the far corner of his kennel, his head resting on his paws, but Jack noticed something, just a slight shift in the dog's posture. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Rex was paying attention. Jack approached slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. The last few weeks of patience were paying off. Rex's eyes flicked to the vest in Jack's hand, then back to his face. The familiar flicker of recognition was there again, deeper this time. "Rex," Jack whispered, his voice low but steady. "It's me, buddy. Remember? We've been through a lot together. You and me." Rex's ears twitched. He didn't move, but his gaze softened just slightly. Jack held the vest up, letting it catch the light, the fabric worn with the memories of battles fought. "This," he said quietly, "this is where we're from. We're partners. Always." It wasn't the grand reunion Jack had hoped for, but it was a start. Rex didn't retreat this time. Instead, he lifted his head, slowly rising to his feet. His movements were cautious, measured, but there was something in the way he held himself, something Jack hadn't seen in months. It was as though Rex was beginning to remember. The trust wasn't fully restored, but the cracks in the wall between them were starting to show. Jack stepped closer, keeping the distance small, offering no command. "You ready, boy?" he asked softly. For the first time in weeks, Rex walked forward without hesitation, his eyes locked on Jack's. There was still a trace of uncertainty in his movements. But there was also something else, something Jack had seen in the dog's eyes before, during their missions in the dark, in the heat of battle. It was determination. Jack knelt down, holding out his hand, and to his amazement, Rex sniffed it carefully. Then, in an almost imperceptible motion, Rex placed his head gently against Jack's palm, as if testing the waters of the past. Jack didn't flinch, didn't pull back. Instead, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "I'm not going anywhere, Rex. We're in this together. Always." The dog remained by his side for a few moments longer before slowly sitting down, his back pressed against the wall of the kennel. It wasn't a grand gesture of affection, but it was a sign, a signal that Rex was willing to try. Over the next few days, Jack continued his quiet persistence. They walked together, slowly at first. Rex keeping his distance, but staying near Jack's side. They practiced their old routines, the ones that had once kept them alive. Rex hesitated at first, unsure of the commands Jack gave him. But over time, something in his movements began to click. It wasn't perfect, but the signs were there. Then came a breakthrough, one that Jack had longed for, but had dared not expect. It happened during one of their evening walks. The shelter had emptied out, and the only sound in the yard was the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. Jack had Rex walk alongside him, allowing the dog to guide them as they used to do on their patrols. They reached the corner of the yard, and Jack stopped, feeling the weight of the moment. "Right, Rex," he said, his voice firm, but gentle. "Let's check the perimeter." Rex's ears perked up at the familiar tone, the cadence of Jack's voice. Without any further command, the dog immediately shifted into position, his body tense, his head turning to scan the area with military precision. Jack's heart raced. It wasn't a simple reaction. It was the old Rex, the dog that had always been a step ahead, anticipating Jack's every move. Jack stood frozen for a moment, watching Rex, unable to believe what he was seeing. The bond was coming back. The connection was there, faint but real. "Good boy, Rex," Jack whispered, the words thick with emotion. "Good boy." For the first time in a long while, Jack allowed himself to feel something he hadn't in months: hope. As the weeks passed, Jack found himself waking up each morning with a new sense of purpose. It wasn't just about going through the motions anymore. Every step he took with Rex, every small breakthrough, was a reminder that healing was possible, no matter how broken they both had felt. Rex's progress was slow, but there were signs, real, tangible signs, that the dog he had known was still inside. And that gave Jack a reason to keep fighting. But the road to recovery was never linear. There were days when the shadows of the past crept in, when Rex's old trauma would flare up, and all the progress they'd made seemed to unravel in an instant. One evening, after a particularly bad storm, Jack found himself staring at the empty spot on the couch where Rex had once slept. The sound of thunder rattled the windows, the distant cracks of lightning echoing in the distance. Rex had always been sensitive to storms. Jack could remember countless nights during their deployments when the thunder would roll in and Rex would stand watch, his body rigid, his ears perked, always alert, always ready. It was that same hypervigilance that had kept them both alive in the face of danger. But now, in the safety of civilian life, that vigilance seemed misplaced, more a curse than a blessing. Jack stood up from the couch, his heart heavy. Rex hadn't eaten much today, and the dog was pacing back and forth in the living room, unable to settle. It wasn't just the storm. It was something deeper, something Jack didn't fully understand, but that he could feel in the air. "Rex, it's okay, boy," Jack whispered as he approached the dog, his voice calm, soothing. "We're safe. There's nothing out there. You don't have to be on guard anymore." But Rex wasn't listening. His eyes were wild, his body trembling with anxiety. Jack felt the familiar pang in his chest, the fear that maybe he wasn't enough to help his partner heal. He knelt down, trying to reach Rex, but the dog pulled away, backing into the corner of the room. His breathing was shallow, erratic. Jack sat there, unsure of what to do, feeling the weight of the past pressing down on him. He had promised Rex that they would heal together. He had promised that nothing would tear them apart again. But what if it was too much? What if Rex had been so broken by the years of separation and trauma that nothing Jack did could fix it? For hours, the storm raged outside, and Jack stayed by Rex's side. He didn't force the dog to come to him. He simply remained there, a quiet presence, offering his support. He knew that Rex needed time. They both needed time, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. The feeling that their past, everything they had been through, might always be a barrier between them. It was a terrifying thought, one that made him question if healing was even possible. But as the storm subsided and the first light of dawn crept through the windows, Jack saw something. Rex had stopped pacing. His breathing had slowed, and he was sitting near the door, staring out into the yard. His posture was still tense, but there was a subtle shift. He wasn't as defensive as before. His eyes, though wary, no longer seemed as fearful. Jack got up slowly and approached the dog, careful not to startle him. "You okay, buddy?" he asked, his voice a quiet murmur. Rex turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting Jack's. For the first time in days, there was a spark, a flicker of recognition. Jack took a step closer, keeping his movements slow and steady. He crouched down to Rex's level and held out his hand. Rex hesitated for a moment, his ears flicking in uncertainty. But then, with a small nudge, he rested his head against Jack's hand. Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The connection, fragile as it was, had returned. "You're not alone, Rex," Jack whispered. "I'll never leave you again." That night, as Jack lay in bed, he felt the familiar weight of Rex's body curled up beside him on the floor. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. The dog's presence, however quiet, was a reminder that they were healing together, step by step. And even though the journey ahead was still long, Jack knew one thing for certain. They were no longer lost. The road ahead wasn't just about fixing what had been broken. It was about rediscovering who they were now, together. The months passed in a haze of small victories and setbacks, each day a struggle to rebuild what had been lost. Jack and Rex had come a long way from the shattered reunion in the shelter, but neither of them had fully healed. The scars of war, the trauma of separation, and the pain of their past loomed over them like a shadow, one that neither could escape. But they kept going, determined to reclaim the bond that had once made them unstoppable. The turning point came on a day that seemed like any other. Jack was sitting outside in his backyard. watching as Rex patrolled the yard, his movements still cautious but more measured. The dog had come a long way from the hypervigilant, anxious animal Jack had first brought home. But Rex's training, his instinct for protection, still remained intact, and that made Jack proud. They had come to a quiet understanding. Jack respected Rex's space, and in return, Rex had begun to trust Jack again. But despite their progress, the looming question remained. Would they ever be truly whole again? Jack stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the yard. He approached Rex, who was resting near the gate, his eyes scanning the horizon. Jack knelt down and gently scratched behind his ears, just like he used to. "You ready for a test, boy?" Jack asked, his voice soft but firm. "Let's see if we still have it." He stood up and took a few steps back, looking at the makeshift obstacle course he had set up in the yard. It wasn't much, just a few old barrels, some ropes, and a few wooden boards, but it was enough. Enough to test whether Rex still had the skills they had perfected together in the field. Jack clapped his hands once. "Rex, come." The German shepherd's ears perked up, and for a moment, nothing happened. Jack's heart sank, and a wave of doubt washed over him. Had they come so far only to be held back by the weight of their past? Then, without warning, Rex sprang into action. The dog leapt over the first hurdle, his muscles rippling as he moved with purpose. Jack's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment that would define their future. Rex weaved through the barrels, his movements fluid and precise, as though every command Jack had ever given him was coming back in a flood. "Good boy," Jack called, his voice shaking with emotion. Rex continued the course, his focus unwavering. As he reached the final obstacle, a narrow gap between two boards, he hesitated for only a moment before making the jump, just like they had done countless times before. Jack was on the edge of his seat, watching every move, holding his breath. When Rex landed smoothly on the other side, a triumphant bark escaped his throat. Jack's heart surged with pride. "That's it, buddy," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "We still got it." For a moment, Rex stood there, panting heavily, his tail wagging slightly. The dog looked back at Jack, their eyes meeting, and in that moment, something shifted. There was no longer any distance between them. The bond had been reforged. It wasn't perfect, and there were still days of struggle ahead, but they had made it. They had survived. Jack knelt down beside Rex, wrapping his arms around the dog's neck. "I don't know what I would have done without you, Rex. You've been my partner through it all." The dog licked his hand gently, the simple gesture a reminder of everything they had been through together. Jack closed his eyes, letting the tears fall freely now. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. As Jack sat there with Rex by his side, he realized that their journey wasn't just about overcoming the past. It was about learning to live with it. The scars would always be there, but they didn't define them. What mattered now was the future. What mattered now was the healing they had found in each other. The story of Jack and Rex was no longer just about a man and his dog. It was about resilience, about the power of loyalty, and about the strength found in facing the darkest parts of oneself. It was about the quiet understanding between two souls that had once been shattered, but were now whole again. Jack and Rex's journey is a testament to the healing power of loyalty, love, and understanding. Even when the world seemed to tear them apart, their bond remained. And through patience and persistence, they were able to rebuild what had been lost. This story reminds us that no matter how deep the wounds, with time, healing, and the right support, we can rise again, stronger and more resilient than before. What do you think about Jack and Rex's journey? Have you ever experienced a bond that was tested by time and trauma? Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful stories of hope and healing.